Good morning, friends. It's Saturday, and I'm back with Chapter 19 of my upcoming book, Campaign at Fort Stix. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the mists of time with a story I call Stand Down. Arriving back home at my uncle's house, I saw immediately that my grandfather's truck was in the driveway. There was no mistaking the camper shell with the stickers we bought and put on it during the end of summer trip when they took me home to Arizona several years before. I helped Mark put away the fishing gear while my uncle carried the fish in the house. He said we would clean the fish after dinner and get them soaking in brine for a fish fry the next afternoon. Leaving my shoes on the back porch, as I had become accustomed to, I went inside and was immediately greeted by my grandmother. "Huma!" I exclaimed. "We went fishing and I got 5 nice catfish. Uncle says they're hard to clean, but I told him I would clean them." "Mensch, you smell like fish," Grandma said as she wrapped me in a hug and then grabbed my hands to look at my fingernails. "You go now and wash up, and then you can tell me about the fish. Be sure to use the brush on those nails." I went upstairs with Mark and got cleaned up for dinner, making sure to use the fingernail brush until there was not a speck of dirt under my nails. Then I put on clean pajamas and went down for dinner. I was very tired by the time dinner was finished, but I had said I would clean the catfish. I was given a knife, a pair of pliers, and a cutting board at the kitchen sink. In case you've never cleaned a catfish, the process is not complicated, but what can make it hard is skinning the fish. A ring is cut around the base of the head, very lightly, so it only cuts the skin and not the meat. Then pliers are used to pull the skin off toward the tail, like removing a sock. A slimy, glued-on sock that does not want to be removed and will resist your every effort. Sometimes a little bit of the skin will let loose from the rest, causing your arm to go flying in the direction you are pulling, as the dead fish attempts to escape in the opposite direction. Once the fish is skinned, it is a simple matter to cut off the head, remove the entrails, and wash the fish. This completes the cleaning process, and it is ready to be soaked in brine or lemon juice, as one prefers in preparation for cooking. Brine is a favorite because it pre-salts the fish. My uncle laid out some newspaper on the kitchen table and began to clean the other fish. I skinned the first catfish and was just putting the waste into the trash bag when I looked over and saw my uncle was nearly finished with his pile of fish. At first, I was amazed, as I had never seen anyone clean that many fish that fast. Then as I watched, I saw him fillet a large bass. Laying the clean fillets in a bowl, he tossed the rest of the fish in a trash bag. I could not believe my eyes. There was still a lot of meat between the bones on the fish he threw away. He was wasting fish. I turned back and made a ring cut to another catfish and pulled the skin with the pliers. Slowly it came away, leaving a nice pink catfish body. I removed the head and entrails and laid the clean fish in the sink. As I grabbed the third fish, I saw my uncle wrapping up the trash. He set his bowl of fish fillets on the counter and went off to join my aunt and grandparents in the dining room. He had filleted about 20 fish in the time it took me to clean 2 catfish. Standing there tired and alone, I continued. Luckily, there were only 5 catfish. As I cleaned them, I pictured an old war cartoon I had seen which depicted soldiers peeling a mountain of potatoes in an army mess tent during the war on KP duty. I could definitely relate. As I cleaned the fish, I overheard my grandma talking to my uncle about the upcoming 4th of July, just 2 days away. My father was hosting a pig roast at the farm, and all of the family was invited. My uncle was not too interested in going, but my grandmother talked him into it because it was also the last chance to celebrate with my other aunt and uncle before they moved to Arizona. Though I was not formally privy to the information, I learned I was supposed to be riding back to Indiana with my grandparents on Saturday, tomorrow. Since my uncle would be joining the festivities, I would get to spend the weekend with my cousins and go home Sunday night. I rinsed my last fish off and put them in the bowl with the fillets and threw away the trash. I was really looking forward to having fresh fried catfish and knew they were a favorite of my grandmother too. Normally, I would try to stay up and hover in the background quietly when the grown-ups were talking in the evening. It never failed that I learned something new about our family during these times. There was a lot to learn that was not commonly spoken of regarding the family leaving Germany after the war and things that happened during the war. A lot of the times when my grandmother spoke, it was in her native German, but on occasions, like tonight, where my aunt, who did not speak German, was included, she spoke English. This was a rare opportunity for me to listen and not have to translate the conversation like when my mother and her sisters spoke with Grandma. I was not fluent in German and only understood about a third of what was said, and sometimes had to look up things in my big language encyclopedia. But tonight, I was much too tired. I said goodnight, washed my hands, and went off to bed. I was up with the sun on Saturday morning, ready to engage the day and see what adventures awaited. Breakfast was a special occasion this morning, as my aunt was trying out a new buttermilk pancake recipe, and she also made preserves from cherries to put on them. I hovered around the kitchen as my aunt and grandma made sure the griddle was at the proper temperature and watched as the golden pancakes began to pile up on the plate. My uncle contributed to the special breakfast as well, with a heaping pile of venison sausage patties. They were from the deer he got the year before, which was now mounted over the mantel in the family room. While we were eating, my grandmother told my uncle to be sure and savor some duck blood when he went hunting that fall so she could make duck blood soup. My aunt looked like she would be sick when she heard this, and I could not help but laugh. My grandma's duck blood soup was amazing. When breakfast was finished, my cousins and I left the adults to their coffee as we went into the den to watch cartoons. I had not had access to a television for so long that I almost forgot about Saturday morning cartoons. I found myself dazed as I immersed myself in them and did not even notice my uncle preparing to start frying fish at lunch. When the last cartoon was over, we went outside to find him setting up a pot of oil on a burner by the picnic table. He had the bowl of fish and other things on one end of the table as my aunt set plates and utensils for the adults to sit and eat at the other end. When I tried to go over and help, I was quickly shooed away because of the hot oil. My attention was quickly diverted by my cousins as they called for me to come and play. We ran around for a while before settling on a game when my aunt called us for lunch. I was excited as I knew the fish must be done and headed for the table on the porch that was set up for us kids. I loved fish and was ready for it. Once we were all seated, my aunt came out from the house carrying a pot. I guessed it must be coleslaw or some other side appropriate to be served with fish. I was wrong. I sat back in disgust as she piled beans and franks on my plate. What was this? "Is the fish not ready?" I asked. "Not yet," my aunt said. "It's going to be a while." The picnic table was far enough away from the porch that I could not hear what was being said as my grandparents and uncle were talking. So taking my aunt at her word, I figured we were having beans and franks for lunch and the fish would be for dinner. Despite my disappointment, I cleaned my plate and ran off to play with my cousins. During one of our rounds of the house, I noticed the adults sitting at the table. My uncle was no longer cooking, and there was a great pile of golden fried fish on the table before them. Then they started to eat, and as the fish disappeared, I felt betrayed. I was not going to get any fish. I had worked my butt off to clean those catfish, even overlooking the sacrilegious activity of my uncle filleting fish, and now I wouldn't get any of it. I became angry and looked for some place where I could be alone. When I saw the windmill, it was blocked from view of the picnic table by the large tree in the front yard. Looking to make sure my cousins did not notice, I ran to it and climbed to the top. The grate on the windmill was fairly large, and the frame holding the blade formed a barrier around the work platform. I laid down on my side and looked down through the hole in the center at the large brown object hanging there. Reaching out to touch it, I found it was greasy and smelled. It was a ham. Obviously, my uncle was country curing a ham in the windmill. I laid back and looked up at the sky. I was feeling pretty dejected at not having been included in the fish, especially after working so hard on them. At some point, I drifted off to sleep. "Kevin," my grandmother called from somewhere below me. "Kevin, we're leaving now." I opened my eyes and looked around. I was still in the top of the windmill, and a light breeze was blowing. The sky was not as bright blue, and I realized I must have napped the afternoon away. I looked down toward my grandfather's truck and saw my cousins, aunt, and uncle gathered around the driver's door. "I don't know where he got off to," my uncle said, "but he will see you at the pig roast. Drive safe, and we will see you Monday." I saw my grandmother nod and then watched as they pulled out of the driveway. My cousins, aunt, and uncle waved until they were out of sight, and then my uncle turned to my cousins. "I need you boys to find Kevin," he said. "He's around here somewhere, and it's almost time for dinner." My cousins immediately ran off toward the barn as my aunt and uncle walked up the porch and into the house. When everyone was out of sight, I quickly made my way down the windmill and walked around to sit on the back porch. I was still upset about not having any fish, but I let it be. I had heard something said about the younger boys not getting fish because of fear of them choking on bones, but never had any idea that it could possibly include me. After a while, my cousins came walking up to the back porch and found me sitting there. "Where were you?" Mark asked. "Oma already left to go back to Indiana, and Papa says it's almost time for dinner." I was not about to tell them that I was up in the windmill and heard it all. I had not gotten into any trouble so far since being here, and was not about to volunteer for it. I thought quickly and made up a believable tale. "I was in the back of the barn laying on the hay after lunch and fell asleep," I said, trying to incorporate a little truth. "I woke up and came out here and everybody was gone. I guess I napped all afternoon." "We just came from the barn and did not see you there," Mark said. "Which way did you go?" I asked. "Through there." Mark pointed around the front of the barn, the way we had gone before. "Oh, okay," I said. "I came back by the garden and then here to the porch. I guess you guys must have been going as I was leaving." "Yeah, that makes sense," Mark said as he got up to knock on the back door. My aunt came to let us in and looked at me. "There you are. Where were you when Oma left?" "He fell asleep in the hay in the barn after lunch," Mark said for me, saving me from having to lie to my aunt. "Well, you have had a pretty busy week," she said and stepped back to let us in. "You boys go get washed up for dinner." Once again, I showered and put on clean pajamas. But this time, I was telling myself it would be the last time, because tomorrow night, I would be home. After not being able to enjoy the fish I worked so hard for, I was ready to go home. Then it occurred to me that I could have probably gone home tonight. After all, my grandmother had come to Wisconsin with the intention of picking me up and taking me home. If I had just asked before she left, she probably would have let me go with them. I was quiet during dinner and afterward went up to the room and grabbed my magazines. I figured I would be up pretty late this evening since I slept this afternoon. I was reading about tracking grizzly bears in the woods of Alaska. After following tracks over several hills, the author was coming down into a draw when the bear suddenly appeared and reared up on its hind legs about 100 yards away. There was a dead deer on the trail behind the bear, and the hunter decided it was protecting its kill. Taking his time, he sighted in on the bear and flipped the safety off of his hunting rifle. He did not want to shoot the bear while it was standing, but rather waited for it to settle back down on all fours. The bear seemed to know what he was up to, and took several steps toward the hunter while standing. Then it growled loudly and swiped at the air as if to tell the hunter to go away. Knowing the bear was growing increasingly agitated, the hunter sighted in and began to squeeze the trigger. I woke to the sound of something knocking above me. The room was dark, and my magazines were back on the nightstand. Obviously, someone had come in and tucked me in as I slept and turned the lights off. The room was pitch black, and I could not even see my hand in front of my face. The knocking came again. I reached out and turned on the lamp on the nightstand. Looking around, there was nothing in the room, and it was quiet. Then a loud scratching sound could be heard, followed by several knocks. What was that? It sounded like a grizzly was trying to claw his way inside. I laughed to myself. There were no grizzly bears in southern Wisconsin. I got up from the bed and stood in the middle of the room. The sound came again, but now it sounded like it was up in the attic, as I could hear it best by the attic door. I opened the door and inched up the stairs without turning on the light. If something was up there, I did not want it to see me. As I neared the top of the stairs, the scratching sound came again, and I saw a shadow on the wall at the top of the stairs move down the wall like an arm with claws. I held my breath. Whatever was up there must be pretty big to have an arm that big. I peeked up over the edge of the staircase into the darkness beyond. The moon was shining into the window, and I saw the arm move across the window before stopping to bang on the sill. Then the big tree out front tipped to the side, blocking the moonlight, and I realized it was just the wind hitting a branch on the window. I breathed heavily as I ascended into the room and walked to the window. Outside, the wind was blowing fiercely, and I could see a large line of storm clouds toward the horizon. It looked like we were going to be in for a good storm before morning. I settled onto the floor to watch the storm and propped my face on my arm on the windowsill. Suddenly, there was a loud screeching behind me. I jumped up and spun around, ready to face my attacker, only to find Mark standing at the top of the stairs. "What are you looking at?" he asked, and then ran away when I spun around. I guess the look on my face must have been crazy, because I heard him run down the stairs and then heard the bedroom door slamming. I went back down to the bed, turning the lights off and closing the door as I went. Surely the noise Mark made must have woken my aunt and uncle, and I did not want them to find me in the attic, as I still did not know if it was okay for me to be there. A sliver of light arced across the wall as someone cracked the bedroom door open to look in on me, but I did not move. Unless someone spoke to me, I was going to remain quiet and avoid having to explain what had happened. The light went away, and I heard the door click shut as sleep once again welcomed me. When I woke in the morning, the house was quieter than I had ever heard it. I could not hear my aunt down in the kitchen, nor my cousins moving about. I got up and dressed while listening to the silence. Going downstairs, I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and listened, but still heard nothing. Walking slowly toward the front door, I felt the need to go look and make sure the car was still there and they had not left for Indiana without me. "Good morning," my uncle said loudly from his den to my right. I jumped, startled, and he laughed at my reaction. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you," he said. "Your aunt and the boys have gone to church and will be back in a couple hours. She left you a plate of breakfast in the oven, so go ahead and eat when you're ready." "Thank you," I said, and headed for the kitchen as he resumed reading. I found a plate with scrambled eggs, sausage, and toast in the oven. It was warm, and there was a glass of orange juice sitting at my usual place at the table. I guessed they had not been gone long, and it was probably the sudden quiet which had awakened me. I sat and ate quietly. There was no cereal box to read, nor cousins to talk to, so I finished pretty quickly. I rinsed my plate in the sink and went to the back door. There was no sign of the storm from the previous night. Obviously, it never made it over to us other than the wind. I sat on the back steps and looked out at the world. It was a nice morning, and I wondered how my garden was doing as I looked at my aunt's garden. I'd only been gone for a week, so the weeds should not be too bad. Hopefully, there had been some rain or someone had watered it for me. My uncle came out the back door and headed over to his pop-up camper. He opened it up and stepped inside to take out some fishing gear. The reels were bigger than any I had ever seen in real life, but I recognized them from my magazines as saltwater gear. Then I remembered they had been vacationing in Florida, and it made sense. Florida had salt water all around it. He moved the fishing gear to the garage and then proceeded to sweep and wash the camper. I was getting bored, but had no idea what I wanted to do. Going to the guest bedroom, I opened the drawer where my clothes were and got out my gym bag. I put all of my clothes in it and noticed that the pants with the stained knees and holes in the thighs had been fixed. There were no longer holes in the thighs, as my aunt had patched them, and the stains in the knees were gone. She must know some magic to get stains out. Setting the bag on the end of the bed, I grabbed one of my magazines and started reading. Before too long, I began to hear noises in the house as my aunt and the cousins returned, and Mark poked his head in to see what I was doing. I grabbed my gym bag and went downstairs to put my skateboard into it so I would not forget it, and then it was lunchtime. After lunch, we spent the afternoon just hanging out in the backyard, not really doing much. My aunt busied herself making a roast chicken dinner, and I was told the plan was to leave for Indiana sometime after dinner. After spending a week on my uncle's farm in Wisconsin with my 3 mild-mannered cousins, I was relieved to be returning to our farm and some serious raucous activity. Don't get me wrong, my cousins were a great bunch of guys, but their discipline level was way too high for me. Somehow, we got a late start that evening, as it was almost dark when we pulled out of the drive. Sitting next to Mark, I stared out the window at the darkness and reflected on the past week. I had a good time, no doubt, and we made some good memories. I also wondered what I would find at home. When I returned to Arizona from Grandma's, my parents had moved away from Phoenix to Flagstaff, and there was no calf or chickens anymore. What changes awaited me now? I hope you enjoyed this look into the campaign at Fort Stix. That's all for now, but I'll be back again next week with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.